Our ninth finalist is from Batavia, New York. And this is a young man who has been part of the Buffalo startup ecosystem for a long time. We work together, Ron and I, with Brian Bell. Brian Bell from Medical Conservation Devices. Come on up, Brian. How are you, buddy? It's nice to see you.
Thank you.
Good luck. You're going to talk to the machine?
I'm going to talk to the machine, and it's going to talk to the
Do you need help or anything?
No, I think we're set. Well, thank you very much. My name is Brian Bell, as Jordan mentioned, and this is Clarity, the next generation of anesthesia machines. So there's 4 key points we want you to take away from today's presentation. First is when you go into the operating room for surgery, your doctor has a choice. He can give you an inhaled anesthetic, or he can give you an IV-based one. And the reason they choose an inhaled anesthetic the vast majority of times is those drugs have inherent properties that are good for the patient. First, they're cleared through the lungs just when you exhale. You don't need proper liver and kidney function. The IV drugs do. Secondly, they're not significantly metabolized. So your body doesn't become accommodated to them. You don't build up tolerance to them, okay, as you do certainly with the IVs. Second point, the intensive care unit only has access to the IVs, which we just talked about are inferior to those inhaled anesthetics. Third, Clarity is uniquely positioned to bridge that gap, to bring those inherently beneficial inhaled gases from the OR to that other wing of the hospital, the intensive care unit, and do that while addressing, number 4, a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. So the best way to give you a sense of what happens in the intensive care unit is to start with an example. The journal Burns recently reported, unfortunately, that there was a 2-year-old girl caught in a house fire. Over half of her body was burnt. So damaged were her lungs, they needed to put her on life-supporting ventilation. And to keep her pain-free, they had to give her an IV sedative. Unfortunately, she quickly developed a tolerance to those drugs. The drug dosing had to increase by 1,600% before they added a second IV and yet a third IV. And the only place they could go next was an inhaled anesthetic that kept that child pain-free and allowed the doctors to eliminate all the IVs the next morning. So significant. So as you can imagine, as you get into higher tolerances and higher drug dosing, very quickly the cost of the drugs themselves become very expensive. So things like propofol, which you've heard with Michael Jackson, unfortunately, build up to be very expensive over time. Things like dexmedetomidine, which is considered the gold standard today for IV sedatives, runs several hundreds of dollars a day. Remifentanil can run several thousands of dollars a day. We can sedate a patient better with an inhaled drug and do it for $20 a day. Okay? The more the IVs you give people, the more time they're in the intensive care unit. That's expensive. The more time they tend to be on those life-supporting ventilators, and thus the higher the incidence of pneumonias that you have. And a third of these patients will get pneumonia. And probably most significantly, over 80% of these patients will develop clinical forms of delirium in 4 days. We've given them so many drugs, we're actually affecting the brain function of the patient. And at $42,000 of added costs and 300% higher mortality, that's pretty significant, and probably the #1 issue in intensive care today. So not only are the dollars large, but also are the patient numbers. So slightly less than 20 million patients a year will go in the intensive care unit. A third of them will require mechanical ventilation, and they'll be on that ventilator for an average of over 5 days. So 5 to 6 million patients on top of the large dollar figures are significant. So as you can imagine, there's a call for something better. That something better is to use the same inhaled drugs from the OR at lower dosing to sedate your intensive care patients. There's already been 1,000 patients reported in the clinical research showing that you can sedate a person with inhaled drugs better than an IV. You can get them off of the ventilator quicker. So compelling are those results that Germany has now been the first country to adopt in their national guidelines the use of inhaled anesthetics in replace for an IV. And what's best from us from a business perspective is most of your ICU doctors worldwide are actually trained anesthesiologists. So they understand the pain occurring in the intensive care unit and they understand the benefits of these drugs. The issue has been the machines. Okay? If you want to sedate 10 people in your intensive care unit at $150,000 each for a machine like this Draeger Apollo one, that's expensive. No hospital's capital budget is allowing that these days. In addition to that, if that patient needs more air and oxygen at 4 a.m. in the morning on Tuesday, with that traditional machine, someone actually has to flip a knob and give more of that gas to the patient. You cannot afford to have people managing the machines 24/7 by the bedside, okay? That's where Clarity comes into place. We give you the best of both worlds. We give you the benefits of the inhaled anesthetics without the cost of traditional anesthesia machines. The best way to think of this is it's an add-on to your existing ventilator. Your hospital has already bought a ventilator. The patients we're treating are already on the ventilator. So it's a simple add-on, again, for 1/10 the cost of that traditional anesthesia machine. And best, the core of the intellectual property, of which we have 29 patents worldwide, is that it's self-regulating. So it will sense whether that patient needs more air and oxygen and automatically deliver it to them without influencing the exact amount of drug you want to deliver to that patient. So it's very precise. You can sedate people better, you can get them out of the ICU and off of the ventilator quicker with lower incidences of delirium and pneumonia. Okay. Best of all, it's the customers that are advocating for it. It's the thought leaders. So whether it's Dr. John Arnold at Harvard, Dr. Horiuchi, or the 50 other clinicians we've been in front of across the globe, there's a consensus that they would either buy the machine today, if available, so much so we could do our first year's worth of revenue just on the people on this slide, or they participate in the clinical trials to then not only get the machine approved for sedation, but ultimately the drugs. So who's going to deliver on this promise? It's clearly the management team, of course. This is actually my second medical device company that I've founded. The first one still exists. It actually tripled its revenue in the last 18 months. I was also on the venture capital side, as Jordan mentioned. But the heart of the team really starts with Dr. Bradley Furman. Brad was formerly the director of intensive care at Children's Hospital here in Buffalo. And it was through his daily concerns about how to keep his patients pain-free and how ineffective those IVs are is what led him to invent Clarity. In addition to that, we brought in regulatory people like Kathy Seelover, who's been with 2 Buffalo-based medical device companies before, Doug Defoe, who's a medical device development expert, Alan Green, who's built anesthesia machines for 30 years, and Carl Kramer, who has 10 successful drug approvals through the FDA and actually has worked with Brad in the past on intensive care-based trials. So where are we at? Clarity's real. It works. It's actually in the hands of an FDA-certified lab right now, confirming that it's compliant with international standards for anesthesia machines. Okay? What has to happen after that is certainly we get feedback through the pre-sub that we've already filed with the FDA about our roadmap on the 510K. We filed the 510K before the end of the year, and we start selling product in the second half of 2015. But then again, that gives you an anesthesia machine. You still need to get the drugs approved. They're approved for short-term use in the OR or in the endoscopy suite today. But even though we'd use 25% of the drug or 50% of the drug you normally would in the OR for these patients, we're going to use them for multiple days, up to 96 hours. And that still needs to be proven it's safe and efficacious. So how do we make money? Recurring revenue stream, everyone loves. So $250 for this main piece I'm speaking to here, which is the patient circuit, regardless of time of use. 2 of the soda lime scrubbers per day, all at significant margins. There's actually the opportunity to sell the drugs as well too, though we think there's a better partnership opportunity. And at $15,000 for the machine, that's within the buying authority of many division heads. And it only costs us $2,500 to actually make that machine. So you can follow a razor blade model and place them in for free if you needed to in order to get the consumable stream. Clearly a $3 billion market opportunity is a large one, particularly when it's all consumable revenue. So the first approval allows us to sell an anesthesia machine. It's smaller, it's cheaper than what you have today. We'll attack that through a direct sales force in the 11,000 ambulatory surgical centers and hospitals in North America. Then what we'd look to do is partner internationally for distribution. We already have conversations ongoing in both Korea and India. But ultimately, it's the investment in the clinical trials that gives you the opportunity to market for sedation, and where we think a very large pharmaceutical company or a ventilator company will look to partner with us to certainly bring that technology to their customers and certainly the revenue to their bottom line. We have already started a partnership with one ventilator company that's provided us free machines to help certify our machines to their ventilators as well too. So when we win the $1 million today, you can rest assured the vast majority of that is going to go actually to launch Clarity in the marketplace. To gain the 510(k) approval, to gain the CE mark so we can sell it internationally, and then also build inventory and close those sales. So again, 4 key points. Inhaleds are better. The ICU doesn't have anything except for the IVs. Clarity bridges that gap, and it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.
Nicely done. Sorry, no, over here. Questions? No, questions. Who wants to start? David, I can see it's in your, you got it, right?
You see it in my
eyes. You're putting on your hat when you were working in the OR, I know.
Yeah, put on my glasses. What do you do after 96 hours? What's the game plan then?
Okay. Well, we feel that about half of the patients will be off of the ventilator before that because of just improvement in their underlying conditions. It's really that portion of the market that we're targeting with it. So people have actually used it, inhaled anesthetics, for up to 30 days in some of the clinical research reports. But that's certainly not what we're proposing.
And this has been under development for how long?
Yeah, we started the company in 2009 with a license from the University of Buffalo. We've raised $3 million of funding, $2 million of which has been through equity funding, where Dr. Bradley Furman and myself have several $100,000 of our own cash in the kitty, and about $1 million of grant funding from the National Institutes of Health and the Army, who is actually looking for a smaller, more portable anesthesia system for field use.
The Research Foundation has a significant share of this, I would presume.
So they get a 5% royalty on net sales, and they also took a founding equity position in the company, which is about 5% of the company right now.
Now, are you going to move from Batavia to Buffalo?
It's a long commute. We actually started with our offices in downtown Buffalo, so we're very familiar with the area.
Yeah, this is important stuff. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
Speed John.
Yeah, I missed an obvious one. I think I might have been sedated over lunch when Jordy gave me something. But so the inhalers clearly it's superior.
Correct.
But it's not in the ICU.
Correct.
So that's the dumb question I don't get. Why isn't it in the ICU again?
Well, it really comes down to the machines and the capabilities of them. So not only they're expensive, there's not many spare ones in the hospital. If you wanted to wheel one from the operating room, you're no longer generating revenue from doing surgeries. But more importantly is they're all manually controlled. So again, if you need to give that patient more gas,
right,
in the operating room, the anesthesiologist does that quickly, in addition to tracking the physiological monitors, certainly for the patient. You cannot afford to have someone do that 24 hours a day for up to 4 days of use.
I see. Because the one time I had surgery that I was put under, I was in the in the cart and they had me count backwards, and before I even got to the OR, I was done for.
Correct.
So it wasn't in the OR. But I guess just the fact that it's kind of roaming and portable.
Yeah.
Creates
there are a few exceptions. For example, Dr. John Arnold, I mentioned from Harvard.
Yeah.
They bought a single Draeger Apollo machine for $150,000, so they can sedate one patient at a time.
I see.
But he has 20 beds.
I see.
So what he's looking for is a solution where he can treat all of his people better, not just that one case.
Thanks for the clarification. Thank you.
So just a little more on how it works. One, can you hook multiple people up to this, or it's simply that it's cheaper? Second, it's clearly portable. Do you set it and then, there are all these issues around the thing slips off the patient's mouth.
It's like a bong.
How do you deal with human error and avoiding human error and alerts and?
So there's a lot of questions there, so I'll start one at a time.
Yeah.
First, the same platform that we've incorporated in Clarity does have the ability to not only deliver anesthesia, it can work just as a ventilator itself, okay? And do that across multiple patients. So that's a different application. We're at kind of the alpha stage prototype with that based on some funding from the National Institutes of Health. But it's one of the reasons why the people in Korea, for example, and India are interested in first starting with this and eventually becoming the low-cost platform for anesthesia and ventilation worldwide.
Okay, so this is like a single thing that manages multiple.
Exactly.
Okay.
Human factors was another question. So certainly part of the FDA approval process is to make sure people won't make mistakes. So we've actually engaged with Duke University to use their anesthesia patient simulation labs to start working with them for normal use, but then also the alarm settings, where if something goes wrong, you want to be able to make sure people understand the alarms and can be able to troubleshoot whatever issues are. So that's clearly part of what the normal process would be today.
In Batavia, are you manufacturing these machines?
So we would first need to get clearance from the FDA to start selling.
Right, but how did you make that one?
Okay. So clearly our engineers built it. There's actually 4 of the systems, 2 of which again are at that independent lab right now. This is actually unit number 3. So yes, we built them ourselves. There's a lot of piping, internal printed circuit boards, etc.
All right, so in the future, the plan is to, in Batavia, to also manufacture using that
Absolutely.
space.
What we want is, it's a Western New York technology. We want to be a Western New York business.
Right. How long does it take to make one of those?
It actually only takes about 15 minutes. And that's actually suboptimal today. One of the things is a lot of copper piping inside of there. Ultimately, it can be just a block of plastic. So you can reduce the cost of this even further beyond the $2,500 it costs today. So. And the form factor will look a lot better too. So.
Yeah, the idea seems strong. A little more about the team. How did you guys come together? I also think I noticed that one of the inventors doesn't seem to be with the management team. Can you speak to that?
So Mark Dowie and Brad Furman had invented it when they both were appointed at the University of Buffalo. Mark is no longer with us. So basically we needed to bring in some professional engineers. Mark is very good from a conceptual standpoint, but we needed to really deliver on the promise is first. So the management team, I think it's a strong team. You can check off the box and all the regulatory experiences we've had, over 30 successful 510Ks as a team. The success we've had getting new drug approvals to the marketplace, Carl Kramer in particular. So I think we check all those boxes, and again, you're looking at the person who's going to sell that first group of doctors, the $250,000 in 2015. And so I've been there. We've bootstrapped this company and probably have produced a machine for 1/10 the cost of the development that a traditional ventilator company would put into something like this.
How do you anticipate the regulatory challenge of getting approved for sedation? That looks like a large number.
Surprisingly not, if you don't mind me jumping in right there.
Go ahead.
So all the IV drugs that they use in the intensive care unit started with an OR approval. Okay? And then they did subsequent trials to get that additional label approval for use across multiple days. So dexmedetomidine, which is considered the gold standard today for IV sedation, had 600 patients in their pivotal phase 3 trial. And the primary endpoint there was consistency of sedation, not whether you can do it cheaper or get people out of the ICU or lower that incidence of delirium. So actually, when you drive into it, the costs aren't significant, though we certainly have them incorporated here, and the endpoints aren't significant as well, too. So we think there's a well-known path to do that.
I thought I read that there was a $20 million
Anytime you deal with the government, it's expensive.
For getting to phase 2.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's where we think that strategic partner will come into play. We've been in front of all the major pharmaceutical companies, ventilator companies, anesthesia companies, and what they want to see before they partner with someone is, can you get the first machine approved? Can you sell the first machine? And can you have FDA buy into that long-term clinical strategy of how you propose to show that it's safe and efficacious? Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anybody, any other? Bijan.
Yeah, one last one. You had a list of physicians that were, really excited about it. What did the folks that didn't want to be on the list? What was their hesitancy? I mean, obviously you need approval, but was there any other negative feedback?
No, not at all. I mean, literally, we could have put 50 people's names on there. We wanted to keep the clinical advisory board fairly small so we can get a lot of interaction with them. Again, people like John Arnold who are already using these large anesthesia machines, they help you understand, okay, what is it going to take to actually implement this in the hospital? What resistance are you going to get, if any, from the nurses or the respiratory therapists or the clinicians there? In the OR today, they have to be concerned about whether there's these gases floating around if you're a pregnant nurse. Okay? So at Harvard, what they do now is they put a little badge on the nurses that helps detect if there's anything waffling around in the air. Our system also automatically senses a leak and will alarm, but it's little things like that that you need to know.
Great, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Great job.
Thank you very much.
Terrific.